Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Writer's Corner. I'm Rob Jung. I'll be your host for the next half hour. When Alan Miller asked me to guest host this segment of Writer's Corner, it turned out to be a little serendipity. I asked him who the guest authors were going to be, and he said Matt Goldman and John BAIRD ROGERS. And I had just finished reading John's latest book, Failed Deadly, and I was halfway through Matt's book, The Good Family, so all my homework had been done in advance. But the opportunity is here to introduce these two outstanding Minnesota authors and also tell you that I can unequivocally say these two books are two of the best books I've read this year. So let me tell you a little bit about these guys. Matt Goldman is a Emmy Award-winning television writer. He wrote for a couple of programs you might have heard of, Seinfeld and Ellen, The Ellen Show, and a couple of others as well. But he returned to Minnesota to become a mystery writer, and or a fiction writer, I should say, more than just a mystery writer. And his talent has gotten him a New York Times bestseller designation and many award nominees. He's written 6 books now. I mentioned the most recent, The Good Family. His first 4 books were mystery novels featuring a detective named Nils Shapiro, who honestly I would have to say was one of the most dysfunctional detectives I've ever read. I mean, since Columbo.
Right, thank you.
Nils was there. John BAIRD ROGERS comes from a background of technology, biotech, and finance. He's birthed, nurtured, and sold multiple companies, and then he happened upon a passion that he couldn't let go of, and that's writing fiction. John's written 3 thrillers showing us the underbelly of the medical world, the finance world, the technology world. His books feature a unlikely duo, a steady and strong Joe Mayfield and a woman named Louise Weezy Napolitano, who is whip smart and just a little bit bonkers. Gentlemen, welcome to Writer's Corner.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Let me start off with a question. Both of your recent books, Failed Deadly and The Good Family, are written primarily from the perspective of a female protagonist. How did you happen to choose that, that path on the books as opposed to writing from a male point of view?
Well, I chose a female because I wanted to start with a marriage in which one participant was being dishonest with the other, and the person who was the subject of that dishonesty was feeling gaslit. And I know that it happens. Men do it to women, and women do it to men. My wife is a marriage counselor, so I hear stories, no names, but she just tells me about relationships she knows about, and it goes both ways. But I just felt, and I think generally in society, women can feel more vulnerable in that situation, and so I wanted to show that side of it with Katie, that her husband was acting strangely. She thought everything in her family was fine, and throughout the book, every chapter we learn a little bit more about why it's not. And as the reader learns it, she learns it, and she has children. I think it is both. I know both mothers and fathers, both parents care about their children, but I think mothers are often put in that position of being the primary person to watch out for their children's well-being.
Okay. John, I know that Joe Mayfield is part of the duo, but Weezy's got all the juice in this book. So tell us why you chose to focus on her this time around.
I didn't really choose to focus on her. I created her as a sidekick in the first book, and she just grew so strong through the various stories that she ends up being the protagonist, even though they are co-protagonists. I needed, I mean, when I wrote my first book, I've learned a lot since then. When I was writing my first book, I needed a technical side, and Joe was basically created as an ordinary guy, a nice guy, smart guy, but an ordinary guy. So I needed somebody who was a kind of a tech guru, and so I thought, okay, I'll write this sidekick. And she became Weezy. In the first chapter of the first book, she sits down in a diner in North Dakota and says, "So you're the dumbass." And that's the introduction. And she kind of takes off from there.
Matt, your last two books have been kind of a segue for you into something quite, I would say, quite different from the Nils Shapiro books. What led you to branch out here? What
led me to branch out was my publisher telling me to branch out. The Nils books did well. Nils is the private detective featured in my first 4 books. Due to trends in the business, which was standalones were getting more attention than series books, and my publisher wanted to broaden my audience. I think there are a lot of people love PI stories. Some people won't read PI stories. So they asked me to write a standalone, and I wrote more of a family mystery, and that book has done very well. It's in its 6th printing, Carolina Moonset. Wow. And so they asked me to write another standalone. Nils will be back, but I do enjoy broadening things outside the PI genre. Sure. Yeah.
So John, what's next for you?
Good that you should ask that. I have about 3 or 4 ideas that continue the series. And one of my difficulties probably is that I develop characters and I fall in love with them, and so I want to see them again. And they're also easier to write if you've
know them,
been around them for a while. Yeah. So it's kind of fall into a groove, write the book. But I don't want to fall into a groove because usually that's obvious to the reader. So I'm thinking of trying to branch off into something, perhaps something that happens in Minnesota. So far I've been writing places I know, but the places I know are places like wild North Florida and Vienna, Austria, and stuff like that. I'd love to write something with Minnesota in it.
Matt, you went from being a television writer to writing novels. Tell us about that transition. Was it difficult? What pushed you toward it?
Well, it is a transition I always wanted to make, just because books are my favorite medium, and I feel they have the most intimate relationship between creator and reader, and television is a largely group-written thing. There's a lot of time in a room with other people. I'm quite far on the introversion scale. I always say I'm an introvert with social skills, but I do enjoy spending a lot of time alone, which is great for a novelist. And I started making my living as a television writer when I was 25 years old, and I'd been doing it a long time, and I just felt like it was time for me to get out and get into books, which I think was, for once, I made a lucky business decision in my life, because the television writing career has really deteriorated, and that's one of the reasons the writers are on strike right now.
I was going to say you made a good choice because you'd be on strike.
Yeah, I'm still in the Guild. I did go out to Los Angeles and picket. It's a really tough situation. The writers and the actors are very upbeat and united. which is why I think this strike's going to last a very long time. And it's my third one. I had just got into the Guild when the first one happened. But for me to be in a room by myself, to have complete control over the characters and the story and tell it the way I want to has been a dream for me. My only regret is that I didn't do it sooner.
So you say tell it the way you want to, except for your editors.
Yeah, but my editor at Forge is, first of all, she's very smart. She helps me, and I don't do anything I don't want to do. And she's very clear about that. My name's on the book. She has suggestions, but compared to Hollywood suggestions, I find them to be very light. And I think because I had that background, I am, first of all, she is quite bright, so I'm receptive to her ideas, and I think she likes that, because a lot of authors go in there like, this book is perfect, I won't change a comma, and you know, I'm afraid to read one of my books now because I would want to rewrite it. So I think they can always get better.
I think we've all been there where we've read the book we just got printed and said, oh my.
Yeah, which is why I don't read them after.
Well, yeah. I've read this one, and I've read 3 of your books, and I will tell you that I didn't say oh my to any of them.
Oh, so Rob, thank you very much.
John, you've traveled all over the world, business-wise, so you have a great a plethora of places that you can write from. But my question really is, coming from the world of business and the world of finance, how did you happen to segue into writing novels? And tell us about your path to get there.
Okay. Well, maybe the easiest way to tell it is that I started my college career as a chemistry major.
Look at the camera.
They told us not to do that.
I started my career as a chemistry major, and I moved to mathematics, and I ended up majoring in English. Actually, I studied writing in college, and I absolutely loved it. And then the world intruded for quite a while, and I had the same epiphany that it would be really nice to get out into, to get out of that world and into the world of writing. I also am something of an introvert, and I'm more than happy to be sitting at my computer writing alone, and so that's really how it happened. I'd always had it in the back of my head.
So you both mentioned being introverts and writing alone. How do you balance your family life, and particularly when you're in the midst of writing a novel? How do you balance your social life, your family life, not to mention your promotional life with your books? How do you do all that? Either one of you, jump in here.
I don't know if I do balance it. I have learned, having had a long writing career, you do have to be, or at least I have to be, somewhat selfish, and I just have to get my word count done every day. And there's things I have to say no to. There's times I have to shut my office door in the house. I try to start very early before anyone else is up, including dogs, because it really helps me stay focused. And yeah, you know, working, at least I work at home, so there's no commute time. I have no meetings other than the occasional phone call and the occasional thing like this where I'm out promoting. But so I just try to be a little selfish with my time and make sure I get my work done, and then everything's fine. Yeah.
How about you, John?
Well, Matt is better organized than I am. I have a very understanding wife, and since I am theoretically retired, which is to say I'm a writer, I can use my time. I can use quite a bit of time for writing. my problem is I like it so much that I've gotten involved in a lot of peripheral things that have to do with writing, and I probably spend a little too much time reading other people's books and critiquing and beta reading and on and on and on and on. But so I need to develop a little more discipline, and those early morning hours I really ought to be in there writing, and I am about half the time.
So how long does it take you to turn out a first draft of Fail Deadly, as an example? From the time you first sit down at the keyboard to the end.
Fail Deadly took close to a year, but I started it in critique groups while I was writing the draft, and that slows the process down.
Yeah.
If I just sat down and wrote a draft, probably half a year.
Okay. How about you, Matt? You sound like yours come out quicker than that.
I try to. For contractual reasons, the book that's coming out next year, which is called Still Waters, I had to write the first draft in 3.5 months.
Wow.
I would prefer not to write it that quickly. I usually would like about 5 months. But I feel like I'm catching up because I started being a novelist relatively late. So, and I have books I want to write. So I do try to write every day and hit a word count, and but it's my full-time job, and I don't have, most novelists have another job, and I don't. So
and we're all jealous.
Well, I worked for a long time in television. That's why I'm able to do this now. But so I try to, and I'll take off a week here and a week there, or a day here and a day there, but I try to do it on a pretty consistent basis.
What's your target word count?
15, between 1,000 and 1,500 words a day, depending on where I am in the process. And it's 7 days a week. I don't take a day off, because otherwise I lose track of the story. I don't outline. I'm making it up as I go along. And if I do it every day, I can keep the thread going.
You bring up an interesting point about outlining and not outlining, and we've all talked about that. John, do you outline your books, or do you write from the seat of your pants?
I have 1 foot in outline and 1 foot in pantsing. And the reason for me is, writing a thriller, there's a plot. If it's approaching a techno thriller, there's a plot that you really have to stick with. So what I do is more or less a bullet point outline of the whole concept, but I just don't like outlining when it gets to character. And therefore, I get halfway through the book, and the plot has to change. So I have to go back and go through the outline again. Yeah. So I've got 1 foot in each.
So you're a hybrid.
I'm a hybrid.
Okay.
Yeah.
As a pantser, Matt, I happen to be one of those too. How much do you have to throw away?
I throw things out, and that's okay. Yeah. Less than an outline's worth of material. I don't outline for a few reasons. One, the big reason you just mentioned, which is your characters have to behave true to themselves, and if you're hammering them into place to make them fit into an outline, you know, whenever you're watching a TV show or reading a book or a movie and a character says, well, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's because they're acting completely out of character, because the character who they are would never do what they're about to do. And so I think it's okay to write some stuff and throw it out, to get stuck once in a while, because then everything's coming from the inside out, and hopefully that story will feel real to the reader. So, yeah.
Okay. So what do you hope that the readers take away from your most recent books? John, we'll start with you. What do you want, short of other than being entertained, which I certainly was?
Well, my books are all written in the near future, for the simple reason that the first book I couldn't write in current day and have the book work. So I pushed it a little far, not very far into the future, and made it fairly normal. So one thing I always am looking for when I'm writing is to address a topic that I think is coming right down the road. And Fail Deadly has to do with hacking and hacking into the national power structure and so on and so forth. So I guess I would like people to take away the fact that it's not this technological thing, it's the impact on people that is going to really matter when things like this happen, and they will.
How about you, Matt?
I just want them to remember how they felt when they were reading it. There's books I love I could not tell you the plot of. I could barely tell you the character names. I just remember how I felt when I read it, and whether that is amused or on the seat of your pants or whatever it is, that's what I'm hoping they take away.
Wow.
Yeah.
You make me feel a little relaxed because I've read so many books that I can't really remember all the details about, but boy, do I have a feeling about that book.
Yeah, I think most people do.
Yeah.
And so, what's next for both of you? Matt, you mentioned a book.
I have a book coming out in May of 2024 called Still Waters, and then I have a book coming out in May of 2025 called The Murder Show. And I'm about a third of the way through the first draft of that.
And the one, are either of those Nils Shapiro books, or are they?
Well, I hope Nils is going to have a cameo appearance in The Murder Show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So they're both though standalones, like your last two?
They are both standalones. They are both set in Minnesota. The Still Waters mostly takes place up on Leech Lake at a fictitious resort, and The Murder Show is in the Twin Cities.
Okay.
Yeah.
John, how about you? What's next?
Well, I'm querying Fatal Cure, which is a genetic manipulation deal, and I'm writing one called Cyberstorm, which is, the draft is about 90% done, and it's being critiqued pretty harshly.
But isn't that good? Isn't that what we're all hoping for
absolutely
critiques?
Wonderful.
You know, the last thing we want is for everybody to tell us how great it is.
Yep, right.
When deep down we know it's not.
Right.
You know. So, tell us more about your background in terms of the business world and how that has impacted your writing.
Well, I was a finance guy, and I thought finance was really complicated. Trading foreign currencies and so on and so forth was really tough. Then I started trying to write, and I found that it was the most difficult thing I'd ever done and the most rewarding. Being a finance guy, I ended up mainly in Vienna for the tech company that I worked for here in Minnesota that was called Zytec and now has been acquired. And that acquisition led me to run to the University of Florida, and I started two very small biotech businesses there, both of them involving genes, one involving environmentalism. And because I was in sort of central North Florida, I got over into the part that's really wild of Florida, which gave me the places that Joe and Weezy go sometimes. So it really has been very interesting. One place that I write about that I haven't been because of COVID is Estonia. I have a character that's an Estonian, and I really, really had planned to go to Estonia, and then COVID hit, so I haven't gone. But
Matt, you're from the Twin Cities, right?
Yes.
And you went to the bright lights of Broadway or
Los Angeles,
or
yes.
somewhere where there are bright lights.
There are lights, a lot of lights there.
And how did you end up there? I mean, how did you happen to wander out there and become a
well,
screenwriter?
when I was a chemistry major as well, and my junior year of college, some friends invited me to go see stand-up comedy, and I went to Williams Pub. And when I saw it, I thought I should be doing that. I can't explain it to this day. I was very quiet, but I started doing it while I was in college, and it went well. I opened for a lot of national acts who came through, Dana Carvey and Louis Anderson, and when he came home, and Roseanne Barr and Bob Saget, and everybody said, you should be a writer, which I can take a hint. Get off the stage, buddy. But it went well for me on stage. But I never loved being up there, and I think they could see that. And I just liked the writing part, and so I did. I just got in my dented Ford Escort. I had just turned 24 and drove out to California, and I was fortunate to know some stand-ups. I had also opened for Jerry Seinfeld. That turned out to be a really good connection for me, because when he got the show, he asked me to work on it, and so that's how it started for me.
Gentlemen, we're down to the last minute and a half, I want to thank you both for coming. If you've got anything you want to say other than go out and buy their books, they're really good. And again, thanks for being here. Alan, have I got time to do a plug for Minnesota Mystery Night? I do. If you want to come to a live version of the Writers' Corner, every third Monday of the month at Axel's Restaurant in Mendota, we have Minnesota Mystery Night, which brings in authors such as these gentlemen, the best authors, and certainly in the Midwest, if not the country.
And alcohol is involved.
And alcohol is involved. So come and join us at 7 p.m. third Wednesday or third Monday of every month. Other than that, once again, thank you all. Next month, Alan will be back with guest authors Newell Searle and this other guy. Rob Jung. That's me. I'll be back back in one of those chairs next month. And until then, hug your kids and read a good book. Have a good month. Bye now.